today because we have him here to talk about the First Mennonite Church history. As you know, we have had flyers and feelers and letters out for the past year or so to get the churches to bring their history to the Wadsworth History on Film. And you're only the 8th church to do so. And I'm hoping and praying that, then let's put that word prayer in here, hoping that praying some of the other ones will bring their message to this forum as well, because we need to know the history. The churches in Wadsworth are a very, very important facet of our legacy.
They are indeed.
So we want so much to have them represented on the air here. But before we get into the First Mennonite Church history, let's talk a little bit about you, who you are, where you were born, when you were born, when you came to Wadsworth. You're not a native of Wadsworth, who your wife was, or is, still is, obviously, but her maiden name, and children, and so forth and so on. So tell us about that.
Well, Caesar, I'm a Western Pennsylvania boy.
Where in Western Pennsylvania?
Around about 10 miles south of Johnstown.
And what
in
was the
Somerset
name?
County.
What was the name of the city or the village or the whatever?
Holsopple, Hollsopple.
Spell that again.
Hollsopple. The name literally means wood apple.
Wood apple, yes.
In Pennsylvania, Deutsch. And that's where I grew, in a rural village.
Farmer?
No. My dad was a thresherman by trade.
No kidding. Would you like to know a little secret? I belong to the Threshermen's Reunion. It's held in Gap, Pennsylvania.
Oh, he's been
every year. About the second or third week of August, and I go out there and I thoroughly enjoy all of the antique tractors and threshers and so forth, all of that. But I'm sorry, your father was a thresher.
Dad has been there. In the summertime, from about May to November, he would thresh. He had about 85 barns where he did custom threshing in central Somerset County. And then in the wintertime, in order to keep us 4 kids fed, he would do sawmilling, and he was an expert sawyer, the man who operates the saw and gets the most wood out of a log so on. It's a real skill.
They do that at the Threshermen's Reunion.
They do, yes, that's right. He used to go to the one in New Centerville.
They have several of them in Pennsylvania.
Yes, yeah. But anyway, Dad would thresh in the summertime, saw lumber in the wintertime.
And who was Dad? Father's name was what?
Lloyd Croyle.
Lloyd Croyle, C-R-O-Y-L-E.
Exactly.
L-L-O-Y-D. And mother was?
Mother was Emma.
Emma?
Maiden name Stahl, S-T-A-H-L.
S-T-A-H, boy, really German.
Yeah, Emma Stahl. And they were married about 63 years until Dad died in '82. And Mother died here at Menoir. I brought her out for her last 2 years. And she died at the Apostolic Home in Rittman on July 4th, 1987.
Oh, boy.
Yeah. Yeah, so they lived a long life, and what happened in the throes of the Depression, Dad put rubber tires on his separator, that's the threshing machine's called separator,
right.
And pneumatic rubber tires on the tractor.
On the tractor.
A big Huber tractor.
Huber tractor, that's what used to drag those threshers around with.
Yeah.
Avery Wagner had one here in Wadsworth.
Oh, probably
Huber.
So. Yeah. And anyway, he would run up these tremendous fuel bills in the wintertime with the sawmill, or in the summertime with the threshing machine, that he'd have to work. And remember, this was Depression time.
You bet.
He had to work in the winter time for the Pennzoil Company to work off the fuel bills. And boy, Caesar, I remember those long letters coming from the Huber Company during the throes of the Depression. This was in '32. And I know they were dunning letters, pleading for another payment, you know. And,
surely.
And my brother just told me a couple of weeks ago that Dad told him one time that things got so bad that a representative from the Huber Company came to investigate this Lloyd Croyle. And Dad showed him the equipment. I'm using it. things are tough. Threshing costs the farmer 2-3 cents a bushel. And I've put all this new equipment on. I'm much more efficient. They don't need to feed an extra couple of hands because I blow the grain right back into the granary. And he saw us 4 kids, and he went back to Marion, Ohio, where the Huber Company was. And he said he must have reported to his people that keep the dogs off Mr. Croyle. He's got his plate full back there. He's got a nice family. Let's wait him out. And they did, and Dad paid his bill. And,
of course he would.
Sure he did. Yeah.
Of course he would, without even a note.
Yeah, right.
Without a note. When were you born?
I was born November the 8th, 1923.
1923, November the 8th.
Yep.
So you're about 76 years
75.
old.
I was 75 in November. Yeah.
And you don't look it. You're in wonderful
Thank
shape.
you.
Thank God for
Caesar.
that. Now, tell us then, you went through high school down there in Holsop. What is it?
In the high school is actually in a little village called Davidsville.
Davidsville. You went to high school there, and you got out of high school and did what?
I worked in the steel mill for 2 years in Johnstown. It was right in 1942 when I got out, and the war was on, and I went through the draft process and was rejected. Was put in 4F. Well, when we Mennonites are pretty close to spiritual reality, and I thought that must be the leading of the Lord. Mm-hmm. And when I was rejected from the draft, and put in 4F for physical disability, I decided to go to college, and I went to Goshen College.
Goshen College, Indiana.
Goshen, Indiana.
Which is a Mennonite college.
Mennonite college, yeah. And my cousin had been there 2 or 3 years early and sort of whet my appetite for it. And I went there, and I knew early on that I wanted to be a professional, and I really admired my dentist. My dentist encouraged me, and Denton, why don't you go to dental school? Well, I think I could.
Well, with a name like Denton, you should go to dental school.
People have asked, what did your mother have in mind? And so...
that's not original with me, incidentally. That's original with Joanna Perino, who is our producer of this show.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Well, anyway, I went to Goshen then, and since I was out of school 2 years, earning money to go to college, in the meantime, I paid some debts off for my dad, which put me in good stead with Dad. And I sent to Pittsburgh and got a dental catalog giving the requirements, the pre-dental requirements to get into dental school. And since I was out 2 years, I wanted to get in just as soon as I had fulfilled the requirements for admission. And I did that, and in the fall of '46, I entered the University of Pittsburgh School of Dental Medicine. Graduated in June.
From Goshen, you had gone to Goshen for 4 years for the
I went to Goshen 2 years. 2 years.
Okay.
I took a summer school at Johnstown Center, University of Pittsburgh, and then went back to Goshen for my second year.
You accelerated your program.
Right, yeah. And then graduated June 14, 1950.
And from dental school.
Right, yeah.
Then did you come directly to Wadsworth?
No, I went to practice in Johnstown. Mm-hmm. And Johnstown is a one industry city, steel. And I went through a couple of steel strikes back there in 3 years I was there. And I said to my wife, let's get out of here.
Now you said 1950.
Mm-hmm. 1950. I graduated from dental school in 1950.
Oh, you graduated from dental school in 1950. Okay, you were 27 years old at the time, approximately.
26, probably, yeah.
At the time. And you said to your wife, when did you get this wife?
I got this wife on June the 19th, 1948.
And where?
Orville, Ohio.
Orville, she's from Orville.
And we met at Goshen, of course.
And what was her maiden name?
Mary Schnell, S-C-H-N-E-L-L. You talk about my mother being German.
Oh boy, that Schnell is just...
That's as German as you can get.
She had the flag all over her face then.
Yeah.
And what was Mary doing there in Goshen?
Mary was a student at Goshen.
What major?
She majored in English and graduated in '47. And then we were married in '48, and I took her to Pittsburgh with me for my last 2 years. And she worked in a She worked for Standard Brands Incorporated, Jell-O and Chase and Sanborn Coffee, those people, and really helped get me through school.
Oh, you bet. I'm sure that she would.
Yeah, I
Then you went to Wadsworth when? Then?
Came to Wadsworth in 1955.
55.
Yeah.
You had practiced down in Johnstown for 5 years. You
Yeah.
came to Wadsworth and set up a practice where?
I was in the Ladrack building first.
The Ladrick building
Ladrack
first.
building, yeah. Yeah, Ben fixed some rooms up there for me, and I was there for 10 years, from 55 to 65. Then Merle Weber prevailed on me. Merle Weber's a name that all our viewers know.
Oh, surely, absolutely.
Merle Weber prevailed on me to get out of that upstairs office and come up High Street to 323 and set my practice up there. So I was up there from 65 to 73, and then Dr. Keeler he retired first, Glenn Keeler. And
E-E-L-E-R.
K-E-E-L-E-R, yeah.
And one N on Glenn, G-L-E-N.
Right. Practiced here many years. And he, I remember, he got me down there to his office, and I made a bridge for him. I remember I was down here in the lower right quadrant.
For himself?
For
personally?
himself, for himself. I don't know if he wanted to see whether I could work with my hands or whether they didn't trust me or what. But anyway, I made a fixed bridge for Glenn. And then he said, Denton, why don't you buy this place? I said, you think I could? He said, you could and you should. You should own something, because I was renting from Ben Ladrick and renting from Harry Pappas and those fellas. You could and you should, he said. Well, one thing led to another, and pretty soon, let's see, in the fall of, in January of 74, I guess, I started at 323 High Street and practiced there until I retired in 1988.
1988. And we're going to talk about that retirement here in a few minutes. Now, you said that we Mennonites believe in the spirituality of the Lord, which of course is very, very true, and that's one of the things that makes us salute and respect the good Mennonites who are in town here. But there are 3 branches of Mennonites in town. How did you happen to choose First Mennonite?
All right. If I can take a little time, you know, we all started back in Zurich, Switzerland,
right,
on a Saturday night, January 21st, 1525, mm-hmm. and we all started together there. Well, then... And
who were the people who started together there?
They called themselves the Swiss Brethren. They were actually three fellas, George Blaurock, Felix Mons, and Conrad Grable. And these fellows were, it was right during the Protestant Reformation, mm-hmm. and these fellows were what we call today radical reformers.
And what were they before they became, quote, Mennonites?
They were...
evangelical.
Yeah, they had a sense of the intrusion of the church and the depending on the church on the state.
Right.
And they came up and were determined that church and state should be separate.
But they were not Catholic, as most of the reformers
No, they were
were.
not Catholic.
Most of the reformers were.
Yes.
They were evangelicals, I believe.
Right, yeah.
Evangelical is just about the same thing in the German tradition. I might be wrong. You correct me here, because you know church history better than I.
Not necessarily.
The evangelicals are what the Lutherans were first called, is that right? Or the first reformers?
The reformers were called evangelical at first,
yes, right.
and they had an evangelical bent, mm-hmm. which they didn't see in the medieval church. I won't call it the Catholic Church, but the medieval church at that time.
Oh, it was the Catholic Church, though.
Yeah,
mm-hmm.
well, sometimes I like to call it the medieval church, because when you say Catholic Church, why, it's like accusing the Jews of crucifying Christ. You know, it's pretty harsh. And
well, history is history.
Okay, that's the way I feel about it, though.
And I'm Roman Catholic, as you well know.
I know you
sure.
are. Yeah, mm-hmm. and I respect you for it.
Then we had these 3 men doing what?
Well, these fellas were radical reformers, and they wanted to get Ulrich Zwingli back there in the early years of the Reformation to
Z-W-I-N-G-L-I.
Z-W-I-N-G-L-I, Ulrich Zwingli. And he was the pastor of the big Grossminster church there in Zurich with the twin spires. I saw it about 5 years ago as I were there. And Zwingli was sort of sympathetic with them, but yet on the other hand, he didn't quite want to break with the state completely. And these reformers, they were so radical at one time. He was preaching, and one of them came in there and interrupted the service and said, "The Lord has anointed me to preach today. Get out of there. I want to preach the truth to these people." And they made quite a reputation for themselves, an ill reputation, I might add. And so the movement was bathed in martyrdom. 6,000-7,000 early Mennonites were martyred, burned at the stake, and so on. And these fellows knew what the cost of radical discipleship was, and they were willing to put their neck on the line.
And literally.
Yeah. And so now to speed this up, the movement went together. Then in the 19th century, you have Jacob Amann, A-M-A-N-N,
right.
breaking off with the Amish. They didn't want to progress. They didn't believe in Christian education.
Now we're talking 300 years later.
Right, about 300 years
because
later.
Because 1525, the 19th century would be 1800s.
Yeah, in the 1800s, yeah. And
Jacob Amann, A-M-A-N, from which the word Amish comes,
that's
right?
Where the word comes, yeah. So the Mennonite Church was born in controversy, and this controversy followed us all through the years. And the immigrants that came from eastern Pennsylvania into Wadsworth in the early 1800s, controversy followed them, and they settled here on the west side of Wadsworth, actually only in the Holmesbrook area here, and there was discord among them, and they couldn't get along, some of them, and one of them by the name of Jacob Whistler got radical and didn't believe in Christian education, didn't believe in Sunday schools, and so on. And he started a movement out here at Maple Hill Church, and John Oberholzer in eastern Pennsylvania had some progressive ideas, not radical ideas. He was criticized for wanting to keep minutes of the meetings and have a constitution and something that you could base your organization on.
A foundation of sorts.
Yeah, right. And he got much criticism, and eventually he was kicked out of the church, literally. And so
that was in Wadsworth.
Well, that was in eastern Pennsylvania.
Oh, eastern Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I believe Oberholzer came to Wadsworth, or came to Montville Township up here to visit a sister, and he ran into some of these Swiss brethren, Mennonites, and they asked him, we're here. Some of them came down from Canada. A fellow named Geisinger was the first Mennonite in Medina County, and we need a pastor. And Oberholt went back and prevailed on this saintly, godly man, Ephraim Hunsberger.
Ephraim Hunsberger, E-P-H-R-I-A-M, Hunsberger, H-U-N-S-B-E-R-G-E-R.
Exactly.
Right.
And Ephraim was had 7 children at that time, and this can't be a long distance call from God. It must be a local call. And but Ephraim came out and investigated. And he was visiting in homes. They didn't have a church. Visiting in homes there in the Holmesbrook area, and they said, we need a pastor so badly. But they didn't put a lot of pressure on Ephraim then. They let him go back to Berks County, Pennsylvania, or Berks or Montgomery. They're close together. And they wrote him a letter. Imploring him to consider coming to Wadsworth. And he showed it to John Oberholzer, and John said, Ephraim, I think this is a long-distance call. I think you should go. Let me ordain you an elder or a bishop so you can go in there and do what you have to do. Bury people, preach to them, baptize them, and so on. And he was already a preacher, ordained a preacher. And so Ephraim Hunsberger, with his 7 children, came out here and lived in a house there across from Isham School. And this was in 1847 when Oberholzer was kicked out of the church in eastern Pennsylvania.
But Oberholzer was a minister.
Yes, he was, yeah.
And he maintained
Very active minister.
his authority to ordain Ephraim Hunsberger.
Right, yes.
Despite the fact that he was kicked out of the church.
Yes, well, I think he ordained Ephraim before he was kicked out of the church, yeah. So Ephraim came, and the little group of believers got together. Well, we've got to have a house of worship. So they picked on a little spot there on Diagonal Road across from the entrance to the hospital today.
Which, of course, would be old Route 57, now it's called Wadsworth Road.
Right, yeah.
And geographically, approximately, 6/10 of a mile northwest of the intersection of Greenwich Road and Wadsworth Road. On the west side of the road.
I'd say that's about right. Yeah, okay. Pretty right.
So we may not have any of those landmarks 50 years from now. So we have to identify. Hopefully the roads will be there.
Yes, right. Well, they built this little cracker box church, 42 by 32, and they worshiped there from let's see, they built that in 1853. And they worshiped there in that little place, and they didn't know what to do, and it comes to 1892.
But before we get to 1892, the Mennonite Church in Wadsworth, I believe, was established in 52, was it not? 1852,
yes, right. 1852, right.
But it was a year later that they had the first block church, or
they built a little cracker box.
Yeah, cracker box.
There, yeah. Mm-hmm. So they carried on out there at Diagonal Road for about 40 years. And the group was small. They added to it, and they lost people, and added and lost. And they were outgrowing that place. And then something happened. This General Conference Mennonite Church, which is what they evolved into, They were great on higher education, and there was a certain amount of clamoring for a school of higher education somewhere in the General Conference.
Right. When you're talking about higher education, you're talking about post-secondary.
Post-secondary, beyond high school.
In other words, college.
Yeah, college, right. And Wadsworth was strategically located. It was about 200 miles from central Pennsylvania and 200 miles from central Indiana, and it was sort of strategic located. And they came to Wadsworth to establish this school, this Wadsworth College, for 2 reasons. 1, the geographical location, and 2, the unending zeal and enthusiasm of the people. The people were enthusiastic, and the church fathers sensed this. And so in about 1860, well, the school had its start about 1855, I guess, or something like that. Took them a long time to get it done because
several years to build.
Oh yeah, we Mennonites work slowly. And,
well, but you do good work.
But anyway, Ephraim Hunsberger came here in '53, and he knew what the future was, what was going to happen. And he looked at that field, that farm field, right across from where he lived. Yeah, right across from Isham School. And the lot was what he thought was overpriced. I said, and Ephraim said, well, what about the whole farm? All 109 acres, I think it was. He said, well, you can get the whole 109 acres for $6,900.
Wow.
He said, I'll take it. And so he bought the whole thing and gave the college about 25 acres there. And that's how the college got land.
And the Mennonite College was on the site where Isham School is right now.
Exactly, yeah. All right. The school had tremendous growing pains, and but they finally got it opened, and it opened in the fall of 1868, and they got some teachers in. We'll call them professors. They got a man, Karl van der Schmissen from Holland, came over, a Mennonite, Dutch Mennonite, and he was to be head of the theology department. They wanted to have a combined theology department, combined seminary, and the liberal arts college. And this thing went on, and it was a real boon for the growing church in Wadsworth, because here you had this influx of students to help teach Sunday school classes, and you had these good preachers to help Huntsberger with his preaching duties and so on. And everything went fine and the church was always in trouble financially. Everything went fine, Caesar, until till there was a call from overseas. We have Mennonite families that want to emigrate to America, and they don't have any money. Can you help us? Well, this just tore a hole in the financial pattern of Wadsworth College, and consequently it just went broke, and they staggered along from 68 to 78, and finally at the conference in I think it was in Iowa maybe, they decided to close the college. It was just a bad deal for the times. The immigration took so much other money, and times weren't the greatest then. And another hard selling point was to sell Mennonites, to sell staid Mennonites on the benefit of higher education. We had an untrained ministry. They were unsupported, and we don't need trained preachers, you know. And so it was like pulling.
Divine inspiration is all you need.
It was like pulling teeth, if you allow the statement, Caesar, to get money from the constituency, and so they closed the college, and this was a real blow to the growing Wadsworth congregation. Here they had this 10 years of high with all this help. Suddenly the rug was pulled out from under them, and they're left to wander and flounder. And things went down pretty badly. They lost membership, and Ephraim Huntsberger was getting old, and the church out there was small. It was still out there in 78. And what do we do? Just by the leading of the Lord, the Congregationalists had left the church out here on College Street.
The Congregationalists, a sect of people from Germany as well.
I would think so. Very German, yeah. And they had the church standing empty from 85 to 93. I guess the church was abandoned because we have no Congregational church in town now. And the Mennonites looked at that plain building. Oh, it's just
perfect.
It fits our psyche, you know, our lifestyle. And so they snapped that up for $2,800 or something like that.
$2,800. You couldn't buy one of those pillars now for $2,800.
And they worshiped there then.
Excuse me, let's give a location of that church.
Yeah.
On the corner of North Pardee and College Street, approximately 500 feet from the center of town,
right,
on the north side of the road.
Right.
Okay. Because one of these days that'll be torn down, unfortunately.
Sure, probably. Well, it's a national landmark now. It may not get torn down right away.
I hope not.
So they came up to the Mennonite church in 1892. Huntsberger was old, and he brought a young fella in by the name of N.C. Hershey, Hirschchey.
Hirschchey.
Yeah.
And incidentally, Ephraim Huntsberger has descendants here in Wadsworth yet.
Yes, he does.
His son was
Dick.
Huntsberger. Frank is his real name, Franklin,
That's right.
but we call him Dick, and he died at age 104. And his grandson is Willard Huntsberger, who died just about 4 or 5 years ago.
Yes.
And then he has his granddaughter-in-law, Orpha Huntsberger, who is still living.
Here, yeah.
And then he has grandchildren, twin girls,
Yes.
who are probably in their 50s by now,
Yeah,
or
I would
maybe
think so.
beyond.
Maybe more, yeah.
So,
Yeah.
just want to make sure we got...
So Hershey came in, and Hershey did two things. One, he moved the church closer to the people, because by then Wadsworth had about 1,000 people, and a lot of the members lived in the western edge of downtown in that Holmesbrook area, and a lot of them could walk to church. You know, when the weather was bad, there were no paved roads out to Diagonal Road.
Not at all.
And I think they only had church every 2 weeks too, because of particularly in the wintertime. So Hershey moved the church to town, and Hershey finally put a stop to preaching in German. That was a big thing. People wanted to be like the churches in town, you know. Churches in town talk English. We want to talk English. We want our preaching to be in English. Our children are starting slowly to go to English schools. Not too much then yet, but they look to the future. And so N.C. Hershey, who by the way became Ephraim Hershey's son-in-law, N.C. married one of Ephraim's daughters. I'm not sure which one, but he became a son-in-law. And Hershey was here then until 1901, and then they brought a fella in, again a college. Both these fellows, Hershey and the fellow I'm going to name now, J.W. Cleaver, Kliewer. He came in, and he was here for 2 years, from 1 to 3, and then he was called to one of the colleges out west, either Bethel or to Bluffton.
Bluffton, Ohio.
Bluffton College was founded about 1903, I believe, something like that.
Right at the turn of the century. Bluffton College, Mennonite College, geographically in Bluffton, Ohio, about 125 or 30 miles west of here.
From here, yes, yeah. And actually, Bluffton College then took the ball from Wadsworth, and the church, the denomination, decided to establish the college in Bluffton, Ohio. I think it's in Putnam County, if I'm not mistaken. Well, then you had a succession of preachers come in here, and they preached up at or here at the church on just off the square. A fellow by name of Elmer Grubb was here from 03 to 09. And then Warren Shelley from 9 to 18. And
Shelley is S-H-E-L-L-Y.
Right, yeah.
And we still have Shelleys in town.
Yes.
Grubbs have relatives in town.
Do they? Okay. And during Warren Shelley's tenure at the church off the square, the men of the church, by the sweat of their brows, got down under that foundation and excavated
cellar
and put a basement in that church to expand it a little bit and get some much needed room for Sunday schools. And they pulled that off, but they didn't do anything to the sanctuary part. I guess because of money or because of sentiment, they wanted to leave that as much as it historically had been when the Congregationalists were there. So they didn't touch the sanctuary until 39, and then they put a new floor in it. They dropped the ceiling, put robes on the choir. They had a choir at that time. They had an organ by that time, and so you can see, Caesar, how progressive. And Eleanor Shapiro, in her classic book that we're both familiar with, I just looked at it the other night. She uses the word liberal for these people.
Liberal for the Mennonites.
At least 4 or 5 times she uses the word liberal to describe these first Mennonites. And compared with the other people, they were considered liberal. Particularly when they put the instrument in
because most of the other Mennonite churches did not have any instrumental music whatsoever.
Right.
Just to have a cappella.
At that time they did. Now some of them do. Yeah. So I think we should talk also about the peace situation. Mennonites historically don't go to war, you know.
Right. Alternate service if there is.
Yeah, alternate service is the other way. Wilmer Shelley came in 1927, and I don't know what he taught these young fellas from 27 to 41. It was on his watch that peace should have been taught. Now, whether it was or whether it wasn't, I don't know. I've got to also say that at that time the church was about 40% non-Mennonite background. These were people from town.
That's right.
That came because it was convenient or they liked the type of worship and so on.
And I went to school with several of those people who went to the first Mennonite church who were not Mennonite.
Is that right? All right. Then you know where I'm coming from. So I don't know what Wilmer Shelley taught these fellas, but Rachel Kreider says that during World War II, there were 30 guys who went to the Army.
Tell us who Rachel Kreider is.
Rachel Kreider is the wife of Dr. Leonard Kreider.
Dr. Leonard Kreider was a chemist.
Leonard Kreider was a research chemist for B.F. Goodrich, now retired, lives in Goshen, Indiana. And Rachel had a natural bent for history.
Very intelligent woman.
Oh my, yes.
Very intelligent. They had a daughter. Who was also
two daughters, Sarah and Anna.
But Sarah was just brilliant.
Both Sarah and Anna and Emil all have PhDs today.
All they're brilliant people, the whole family.
Yeah. So the fellow that they should have had preaching in the late 30s on this peace thing came in 1942 in the name of Donovan Smooker. Donovan Smooker was a big peace man. He was here from 42 to 45, and he
had a wife whose name was, I can picture her, beautiful woman. She was a school teacher too, I believe, or substitute.
I can't help
I cannot think of her name right now, but just a beautiful woman.
Don Smooker eventually got a PhD, and I don't know, I believe it was Leonard Kreider one time said that he really wonders whether the people knew what Don was talking about when he came in 42 to 45 during the war years. He had a radio program over at WAKR called The Chapel of the Air, and that was his big forte. All these preachers seem to have fortes. I'm going to mention Neuenschwander pretty soon. His was visitation. He would visit 400 or 500 times a year. Visiting the constituents, and if you weren't in church Sunday morning, chances are he'd visit you on Sunday afternoon. but he was a tremendous visitor. Each one of them had something that was special: evangelism, Christian education, and Don Smooker's was peace. Russell Mast was a master pulpiteer.
Let's have the spelling of Mast in this case.
M-A-S-T.
And we still have some Masts around.
Just Mast, yeah. I think Russell Mast probably came from the Holmes County Mass down there, or maybe in southern Wayne County.
Known for great sermons. Great
pulpiteer, one of the top pulpiteers in the General Conference. I introduced him a couple of summers ago when he preached for us, and I gave him a pretty good build-up. I said, boy, that's laying it on pretty heavy. I'm not sure I'm worthy of all that. But I named him with about 3 or 4 other big pulpiteers, which the General Conference people would agree with was correct. A.J. Neuenschwander, 1949. He came in, and people liked him. He was energetic. He single-handedly started a Messiah rendition here in Wadsworth. I came in 55, However, I was with the Bethel Church from 55 to 61.
Bethel, describe geographically where Bethel is.
Bethel is out on
Mennonite Road.
Well, it's on Seville Road, actually, up the hill from Mennonite Road, yeah.
That's right.
And Bethel...
Northwest corner, the southwest corner of Mennonite and Seville.
Southwest is right.
Right.
Yeah, the other church is southeast.
The southeast corner, and that one is the
Maple Hill.
Maple Hill,
yeah. So Bethel was up there, and Goshen College is the Bethel, is the church college for Bethel College. And I grew up in the constituency that governs Goshen College, and of which Bethel College belongs. And I don't know whether I got impatient or what, Caesar, but we had a boy that was gifted in music, for one, and you know his name, Marshall Croyle.
Yes, I know Marshall Croyle.
Yeah, he was gifted in music, and we didn't know what to do. The church up on the hill was against instruments, and we didn't know what to do with this lad. His two older siblings would come home from their piano lessons, and this 6-year-old boy would jump on the piano bench and tap out their lessons. Never had a lesson. So we had a sense that he was probably going to be special. And Mary and I wrestled with this for a couple of years. And finally I counseled with my brother, who was a Mennonite minister of the Goshen College, Bethel College persuasion, and he encouraged me, and I give Rachel and Leonard a lot of credit. Rachel and Leonard Kreider, they encouraged us to make the move, and I told them some of the conflicts we had, and I don't want to name all the conflicts that we had up there, but that was the main one that made us change. So in '61 we came over and went to the church on Treese Road. Then was built. Might say a word about that. The Mennonites were the General Conference Mennonites were rapidly outgrowing the facilities here at the church on the square, off the square, and they had expanded as much as they could without doing big damage to the architecture of the building, which they didn't want to do. And so it wasn't unanimous, but eventually they went to Treese Road and broke ground there in about '59, and by 1960 they moved into it. Nice facility, modern facility, but with a certain amount of controversy. We lost some members that didn't feel like making the change, and so about that time A.J. Neuenschwander had gotten up in years. In years, he was 73.
I was going to say he's
younger than you and I are.
Up in years.
Right.
It's the wrong thing to say to this group.
Right. Yeah. And anyway, A.J. decided to retire, and then Lester Hostetler came up, and Lester was an old General Conference Mennonite from way back, rebellious in his way. He went to Union Theological Seminary in New York when no Mennonite students went to Union.
Theological Seminary in New York is on Columbia University's campus.
And considered a very liberal. You mentioned Union Theological Seminary right along with the National Council of Churches, which was bad news at that time. And so Lester came in, and Lester was a great healer. He could heal the breach, and he could bring these two factions together. And you're watching the time, aren't you, Caesar?
Well, unfortunately, we have to, but you're doing well. Go ahead. This is so interesting. And if we go over, we'll do it again, because this is much too interesting to stop.
All right. Lester Hostetler was a big healer he was an old man then, lived to be about 90 when he finally died. But then we called Roy Henry in. And Roy Henry was here from 62 to 66. Roy was a naturalist more than he was a theologian, and maybe he wasn't quite as patient with our people as he might have been. And there was some ill will created. And anyway, Roy finally resigned in June of '66. And we called Lester Hostetler back a second time. And he came back and directed the choir. Of course, church music was his hobby. And he again brought the factions together. And then we got this Don and Elsie Steelberg.
Yep.
Steelberg.
And they did quite a bit.
Elsie, yes, they did. Elsie was a physician, graduate of Northwestern University in anesthesiology. Later took the psychiatric boards and became a board-certified psychiatrist, which she's practicing today in Wichita or in Newton, Kansas. But Don and Elsie were great. Don was intelligent, intellectual, polished. He knew the right things to say. You knew that if he talked to the city council, you knew he'd say the right thing and words would come out right and so on. And Don was very well liked. But eventually, his negative side came out too, and by negative side I only mean that he was big on social justice.
That's right.
Good friend of Father Schindler at St. Bernard's.
St. Bernard's.
And he and Father Schindler were like this, and still are today. As a matter of fact, I became acquainted with Father Schindler through Don Steelberg, because I just went up, symphony chorus was singing at St. Bernard's, and I said, Father Schindler, you don't know who I am, but I'm a good friend of Don Steelberg. Oh, Don, my friend from Wadsworth.
But Don Steelberg was a very apt product of what was happening in the world at the time.
Oh, my, yes.
Just really, really great.
You know, just yesterday I got my church paper, The Mennonite, and the first letter was from Don Steelberg, Wichita, Kansas.
Is that right?
So he's still doing, although I understand he's getting near retirement age now.
He was opposed to churches receiving tax credits.
Yes, that was.
So that's wrong.
That's right. Yeah.
So churches should pay as everybody else.
Pay their fair share. Yeah, that's right. Well, a lot of this stuff didn't go too well with the constituents, but Don was there from 68 to 83, 15 years. I think the church actually sort of looked the other way, because they had these 4 brilliant sons who were coming through high school. And Elsie had her medical work over at Akron General, and the church sort of said, we can't terminate their ministry now. And
what happened though in the meantime? Something else in the north end of town.
Oh, you'll have to bring me up to date on that, Caesar.
Menoir.
Oh, sure. Oh, well, I don't think we'd have ever pulled off Benoit without Don Steelberg. Oh, my, yes. He pulled that off almost single-handedly, Caesar.
Tell us about Menoir. And don't worry about the time, because if we don't finish today, we'll continue it another time, because it's extremely important that we do this.
Well, the Mennonites have always had this feeling for the downtrodden, the homeless, and people that needed help in their old age. For a long time, we identified with the Mennonite home in Bluffton, and we supported that somewhat down through the years. And Elton Beery was a member of the church, and Beery and Steelberg had these tete-a-tetes together to what can we do, what can we do? We had a piece of land.
Beery, B-I-E-R-Y.
B-E-R-Y. Elton Beery. He was a school teacher, graduate of Bluffton College, played football at Bluffton. And Steelberg and Beery and some other men like Mike Freed and Gene Schneider.
Freed with F-R-E-I-D-T.
Right, yeah. Mike is down here in the nursing home now.
But Mike was at the hardware store for years.
Yes, yes, he was. Had a career as a carpenter. And anyway, these people got together, and the wheels started turning, and one of our members, who lived to be 90 plus, Fred Howder.
Fred Howder, surely.
Fred
sure,
Howder,
yes.
yeah.
Anyway, had his wife on.
Did you? Yeah. Well, Fred had.
I'm sorry, his daughter. His daughter.
Fred at one time had a farm up
Yes,
there
right,
in Highland
right,
Heights,
surely.
and Fred had ground there yet, and Fred had enough ground to accommodate this 65 units, I think there are. This facility that Steelberg and the committee, Earl Gottwald, there was a committee from the city, a couple people from council, Earl Gottwald, mayor at the time, he sat on the committee, and they had to get federal funds. Of course, the church had seed money to get this started, and that's another whole story that we can tell the viewers sometime later. Yeah, well, the church fell into seed. Now, one of our members died and left the church a bundle.
A real bundle.
Yes, right. and consequently, the church
Is it
had
appropriate to say who that was, or would you prefer not to?
I know why not. It was Henry Craybill.
Yes, right.
They were French Mennonites.
K-R-A-B-I-L-L.
No.
I'm sorry. That's the other Crable, the banker Crable.
K-R-E-H-B-U-I-L-L.
That's right.
Yeah,
Crable.
it's the old French spelling, yeah. And Henry never married and came over here, and the story is that he and his sisters were so loaded with wealth that the women had it sewed into their skirts and could hardly move, but they brought their wealth with them, and Henry invested well in city service stock, and it appreciated over the years, and we fell heir to this fortune. Yeah. And so the church had seed money to get this memoir, which is a takeoff of Mennonites in Wadsworth.
Right. Do you have any idea? Would there be any reason to not mention how much Henry left?
Well, it was somewhere between $200,000 and $250,000.
$250,000.
About $250,000.
As I remember, people talking about it as $250,000.
And this was not without controversy either, Caesar.
I'm sure not.
I don't know if we ought to go into that, but what should we do with it? Henry left the money to the church to be used, quote, for Jesus. Well, what does that mean? For Jesus. Could mean a lot of things, you know. And so we determined that a lot of this money would be invested in the Mennonite Foundation out in Kansas, where a lot of it is today. We would never use any of it to take over our Sunday morning obligations. We would never do that. But on the other hand, some of the dividends from it, we would service church institutions with it, and we still do, to the tune of about altogether it must add up to about $8,000 or $9,000 a year that we parcel out to the camp and Bluffton, fish here in town, get some of the Salvation Army, and we do good with it. But I don't think it ever. We never allowed it to use it. We never allowed it to use it for ongoing church expenses. Right. So anyway, in 1975, the memoir opened. Again, memoir meaning Mennonites in Wadsworth, and we immediately filled that thing up, and the church is the governing board. People in the church govern it, and Don Steelberg had the presence of mind to get a government experienced attorney from Kent. And this man knew all the shenanigans.
And there are millions of them.
To dealing with the government, you know. And this thing must have been almost 5 years getting started before they ever broke ground, Caesar. Just one setback after another, and Don would belabor this thing and fight it out, and with sheer intellectual sweat, he would be on top of it, and he pulled it off single-handedly, and that would have never happened without Don Steelberg's expertise and know-how.
I knew that Don was heavily involved with him.
Oh,
describe him personally. Tall, thin, reddish hair, light, very, very light hair. I mean, light, thin hair, I guess that's the word.
Yeah, sandy hair. Yeah, Don was, his sermons were intellectual. Some of the people, Don's sermons might have been a little like I described Don Smooker's sermons. People didn't know what he was talking about.
He told me, we were at a meeting one time, and I forgot what it was about, probably some kind of a committee meeting. And we were talking about weight. And he said he weighed 158 pounds, which is probably about right.
That's about right. Yeah.
And the only thought that I had in my mind, I said, it's 158 pounds of brains.
Yeah, that's about right.
He's brilliant,
Yeah,
brilliant
oh
man.
My, yeah. Yeah, he was a raw intellect.
Yeah, he was.
Yeah.
Then after Don Steelberg left, we had one of our favorites. Who was it?
Jim Moore came in.
One of the nicest people that ever walked the face of the earth.
Jim came into a vacuum there. The church was just about fed up to here with intellectualism, and we needed to go another direction for a while to sift things out. And here was this young fellow who was pastor to students at Bluffton College, and
always with white hair, however.
Not quite, Caesar.
No?
When he came in '84, it was not quite as white as it is now, but it was going. It was going, yeah. So Jim came in, and by the way, Jim is my son's father-in-law.
I did not know that.
Jim married one of the Moore girls, Jan.
And Moore is M-O...
M-O-H-R.
Right.
Yeah.
And his first name is James, J-A-M-E-S.
James,
middle name?
James.
That's all right.
Doesn't matter. James D, I believe it is. But anyway, Jim comes from Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, just the same place as some of these other fellows, including Ephraim Huntsberger came from. I think maybe it's the same church, that Hereford Church at Milford Square, Pennsylvania. Yeah, and so Jim came in and almost to a fault, and Jim's going to watch this sometime probably, almost to a fault, Jim is following the recommendation of the pulpit committee. We want you to preach the Bible. Forget about this social stuff. We're filled up with social concerns, and consequently, sometimes when people like Marion Stroud, for instance, would like to hear a sermon on contemporary Washington and what's going on down there and whether the president should or should not be impeached and so on. Sometimes you just like to hear a fresh approach from a theological standpoint. But Jim sticks to the lexicon and preaches from the scriptures every Sunday. Does well.
He probably is one of the kindest, nicest persons I've ever met. He could, with his own charisma and with his own graciousness, convert the multitudes.
Jim is much like A.J. Neuenschwander was. They're that kind of people, sort of earthy and friendly and affable, and can meet anybody. Yeah, we like Jim, and Jim's already been here 15 years.
Yes, and I hope he stays in, he has to be in his 60s.
Jim is nudging 60.
Nudging 60.
59 or 60, yeah.
And I hope he stays to retire.
Yeah.
We, unfortunately, have come to the end of this hour. However, I'm going to invite you back, if I may, please, because I think we need to hear more about the interrelationships among the three Mennonite churches, number one. Number two, I think that we need to hear, and incidentally, I invited the other two Mennonite churches too, and they have declined respectfully because they felt it was not appropriate in so many cases. And that's perfectly all right. We respect that, and we certainly are. We did have John Gaiman talk about the Bethel, but We would like very much to have you talk about that. Also, I'd like to hear more about the memoir, because that is a huge part of Wadsworth.
Yeah.
So at this time, we're going to say goodbye to you, or rather just not a goodbye, because we never say goodbye to anybody. We just continue
Au
our
revoir.
but thank you very much. You not only know the history, but you make it so delightful, right? You sat here in absolute awe. So thank you again. We're at the end of this hour. We'll come back again.
Caesar, it was my pleasure. I enjoyed it.